get into fulgrim, which is a primarch, and his is a little tragic. And if we have time, we will start on the Horus Heresy and go from there. But anyway, I'm going to start this. I've got something I need to do in the kitchen real quick, and then I will be right back. But till then, just listen and enjoy. Most of you guys just listen and sleep anyway, so enjoy your sleep.
This time, for he created such efficiency, such productivity, the trade bloomed again.
I'll be right back.
And with his power, he then opened up one mining facility after another. One person now able to perform the tasks of many due to his innovations and repairs. But this was still not all. Still not the totality of his vision, his breadth of perspective. As the plant increased in productivity, fulgrim then passed off some of those who would normally have worked, those whose skills were far better deployed elsewhere. For fulgrim pulled the entire culture up. He endorsed and patronized not only scientists, explorers, and entrepreneurs, but also musicians, artists, writers, and sculptors. He wished to return Chemos not only to sustainability, but to exalt the human soul, to bring back those things which truly made us great, the arts. Yet as this forward march to a utopia was on track, it was then that the seclusion of Chemos was brought to an end. For it was then that the crusade reached Chemos. It was then that the Emperor himself arrived to claim his errant son. And fulgrim was the fifth found of them all, one of their first. And thus, when all others were subsequently discovered, it was fulgrim that was one of their seniors, or he would have been. The world of Chemos had no formal military, just peacekeepers who worked for the establishment. So fulgrim sent them to meet the beings who came from the skies in ships clearly made for war, for intimidation. Yet, when they were led into the presence of the Lord of Chemos, fulgrim saw the Emperor in the entourage, detected him. And he climbed from his throne and walked to the Emperor, and without quibble or quandary, without hesitation, he simply knelt and offered his sword to the master of mankind. Fulgrim and Chemos had been returned to the Imperium, and he would lead his own army, his own legion of space marines. But there was an issue. Fulgrim had been cheated by fate, his grand destiny snatched away from him. For his legion did not exist. Not really. He was a lord without vassals, a general without an army. And this, I believe, is what cracked his heart. A small slither that was all that evil needed to seep in. How his heart must have broken. To be the inheritor of nothing but a name and a potential, while others inherited vast arrays of men with accolades and accomplishments already heaving from their banners. Fulgrim was thwarted by fate, utterly. Like all of the early found primarchs, fulgrim was tutored by the Emperor himself for a time. And yes, was taken back to Holy Terror, and witnessed its splendor, the glory of it. Everything he had hoped for, everything he had envisioned, it was here, in the Imperium, in the Great Crusade. He learnt of many things, art, philosophy, oratory, and military tactics. He was to be a warlord. But after witnessing the armies of his brothers, after his eyes had drunk in the vast splendor of a reunified Terror, his expectations raised to the high heavens. It was then that his dream was dashed, for he met his legion. The Emperor took him. They stood before great doors. The son prepared to meet the army his father bequeathed him, and the doors opened, slowly, loudly. And Fulgrim must have been so expectant, his heart's in his throat. He walked forward, seeing the front ranks of his marines.
I know that Fulgrim had his struggles, I guess would be a good word to put that. Had his troubles, maybe. But I can't help but feel heartache for him. It's heartbreaking. Honestly, his story is a bit tragic at times. But sorry about that, guys. Yeah, Fulgrim is an insanely complex individual. It took me a minute. I had to do adult shit, laundry, because there's some kind of black hole in the laundry bin where every time you think you're done with the laundry, like the black hole portal on the other side or something comes through and makes 10 more loads of laundry where you think you finished it and you didn't. And it was like, ha ha, psych. You didn't finish me. I finished you. So yeah, that was pretty funny. Had to get up and do that, and then now I can sit and do this. So bear with me a minute.
Very own Astartes, his genetic sons. But then, as he ascended the podium, walked forward, and his eyes became accustomed to the light, the reflections from their polished and buffed parade best shining armor. He looked out, not believing what he saw. His eyes widened, then closed slowly in understanding. For he saw hundreds of men, lined and columned. But that was it. He looked past them to empty spaces, echoing chambers where they should have stood, as far as even his enhanced eyes could see. His legion did not exist. Imagine the pain, the desolation Fulgrim must have felt. His brothers had armies, fleets, tens of thousands under their control, all ready to be shaped, honed by their returned father into the ultimate expression of their purpose. Yet here was he and his legion. They did not exist. But people see this as a selfish thing. His pride was bruised. I think it is not that simple. Not nearly that simple.
It wasn't.
Or selfish. Fulgrim took on this weight immediately. But he did not mourn the ability to compete. Not entirely. Not then. It was the lack of a way to contribute to the best of his impact. The good he could do would always be diminished. His light always slightly obscured, dimmed. The Fulgrim I believed him to be, he would have wept for his inability to fulfill his potential. The others, his brothers, would have to fight harder because he could not take his place in the line. Their sons would die more because he could not be there to help them. the salvation of humanity itself was delayed, or due to chance, for he could not show the others how it could be done better, not without an army of his own. Yet he faced this bitter blow with such gusto, with such effort, such vision, that he made a believer of the Emperor himself. He converted the Lord of Humanity. For Fulgrim addressed his men, his mere 2 companies, as if the vaults were filled to the rafters. He extolled their future as if they were 1,000,000 strong. He painted a pathway of excellence, endeavor, and honorable duty that filled all who heard it with zeal. And ever after, the Emperor had faith in Fulgrim and his elite force. The Emperor's children, he called them, for none others were as close as he. None. And they would be alone in the right to wear the Emperor's aquila, his sign. That he had chosen them to wear his sigil, the honor was not just a reward, it was a gauntlet, a challenge. Could Fulgrim hone his men into the vision he had shared with his scant companies? A worthy challenge. One he leapt at and grasped with both hands. They would be the best. Of this he swore. Quality, until they too had the quantity. He would build the best legion ever to grace the armies of the Imperium. And so he set about it. Now the reason for the numbers was simple. There had been a corruption of their gene seed, one so prolific that it had destroyed the entire crop. Hence the growth of more was taken from the Marines that existed. Scant few. There was little hope for the formation, and they had been relegated to training their solar auxilia before they were sent across the stars. This changed when their template returned. Fulgrim literally saved his legion, as did Magnus later. From him, they took the samples that would permit the resurrection, phoenix-like, from the ashes. The gene techs went to work, and very soon new recruits were being formed and sent to him from both Terra and his home world of Chemos. Yet the cultural difference between the 2 recruitment zones could not be more different. The Emperor's Children was an apt name for multiple reasons, you see. Not just because of what Fulgrim had done and said. The few remaining Terrans of the Legion had been taken from the offspring of defeated warlords and their barons. They were as much hostages as anything to those outside of the Legion. But there is no man so fanatical, so loyal, as he who was once an enemy, but has now seen the light. A convert. Thus they were seen as one of the most fanatically loyal and aggressive about this. Only the word-bearers would outshine them in this regard. But because of their loyalty, their odd pedigree, they were also seen as the best ambassadors of the Emperor. They were to be the epitome of the Marine. Ardent, loyal, disciplined, and living lessons, living lights. Not only in the might of his arms to have defeated their parents, but also might of method and reason, of cause. For the sons of the Emperor's enemies now knelt in his presence, followed in his grand crusade. They were trained and deployed as such early on, but as their lack of replenishment took hold, after the destruction of their gene seed, they just faded down to the scant few hundred that now were a dying breed, only used as a shining example to the solar auxilia. The recruits from Chemos were awed by the primarch far more than his Terran sons. They had served with the Emperor, lived on Terra. Their loyalty would always be to the master of mankind first and foremost. The sons of Chemos were loyal to the godlike man who had changed their world, had been raised amongst them, understood them, had saved their entire world from a slow death. He was like a god to them. For, as he was meant to do, ever did Fulgrim raise all around him up. But as the main recruiting word of the Emperor's Children, soon the Marines coming from Chemos outnumbered those coming from Terra. Also, an important point as we progress. Even though this explosion in numbers was fast, it was not enough to make him an army overnight. So the Emperor's Children was seconded to the expedition fleets of the first found and most beloved primarch, Horus Lupercal. And Fulgrim and he formed a fast friendship, for they had the same dream. Perhaps different ways of achieving it, different perspectives on how it should be executed, but they were unified in this vision. Horus was known to state as his guiding light, we, the Imperium, should always leave a place better than we have found it. Yet I think Fulgrim was made of even better stuff. His was a goal that outshone this guiding light. For this is how he put his goal, his credo. I came from nothing, he said, fixing his sons with a steady gaze. I scrabbled in the quarry pits and down at the deepest mines, carrying buckets on my shoulders because the ascender blew a gasket, he said. I broke my fingernails on raw ore and grew blisters from heat and labor. You look down on them, blind to the beauty of their struggle, blind to what they might become, if only someone would scrape the filth from their faces. He reached down and lifted a child onto his shoulders. The girl laughed and clapped, unafraid of the giant, even as her mother wept. Fulgrim indicated the crowd. His voice had driven many of them to their knees. Look at them, my sons. You are the highest, and they the lowest. It is your duty to raise them up, as high as they will go. Anything less is not worthy of you. End quote. And so, Fulgrim served with Horus and his lunar wolves, and Horus was always lavish in his praise of Fulgrim and his legion. They were small, but they were elite. He even went so far as to confirm that he thought them the best he had ever served with. Many put this off to Horus buttering up Fulgrim, trying to get his hooks into him early. Yet this, I think, is another case of seeing things forward, projecting that which we know of the future onto the past. For Horus did not get his hooks into anyone. He did not need to then. He would not dream of doing so, because he was loyal then. Until Davin, until the intervention of the Chaos Guards, until the betrayal of Erebus, he was beyond reproach, and he stated this compliment without reservation or secrecy. And if one reads the lore as I do, then he was right. The Emperor's children were the best. There can be no other conclusion. Yet being the best elite force was still no match to the honor of leading their own expedition of the Crusade. And long was it in the coming. In that time, Fulgrim was as good as his word, as good as his speech that fine day before the Emperor. He built the best legion out there. They were drilled to perfection of fire and formation, deployment and devastation. He took a personal hand in the design of his mighty flagship, the Gloriana-class battleship, the pride of the Emperor. It was vast, and its halls expansive, not only for training and accommodation, but for display of art and repositories of knowledge, culture, and enlightenment. It was a terror in battle, and a floating palace of the void when in recline. Some say that only the Emperor's own flagship, or that of later Dawn, the Phalanx, would best his masterpiece vessel. So when it was finally time, when his men had gained in number to such an extent that they were able, they formed their own expedition, and all was ready, all was paired, all was as good as any could possibly have made it. Fulgrim and his Emperor's children were finally able to wage war. And what a war he chose. Impossible, some said. Improbable, many remarked. A campaign that would be drenched in blood was the only possible outcome. Yet Fulgrim chose it without hesitation. Yet few understand why. They fall to the basic interpretation that is given. They say it is mere pride, hubris, that made him take this path, shout off his mouth, writing a check his men could not pay. They call it childish. But this, I feel, is utterly unfair. For it forgets that the primarchs, despite their abilities, were still in some part human, and they felt as humans feel. Fulgrim had been working under others, supporting, assisting, for decades now. His men were being super sub almost. Those who are most welcomed when they support another unit or formation. The popularity of the Emperor's children amongst the legions was well known, but it was also felt by all of the supporting formations. Of all the primarchs, it was only Reboot who seemed to care more for the attached baseline human soldiers in his fleet. Fulgrim had them trained as well to excellence, was wary of deploying them, for he truly was one of the best primarchs. He wanted to show his brothers not what he could do. He wanted to show them what they could do to improve. He wanted to be an example. I'm sure of this. And that is exactly what he was made to do. Yet still, in Fulgrim I see a great man, a primarch who, as I said, wished to push his own boundaries, but not for ego, because I believe he saw himself not as a star to be followed. No. I think he saw himself as grabbing the very tethers of human culture and gathering them, putting them over his shoulder, and then trudging forward into the deep snow of ignorance and fear. He was a wayman, a pathfinder, and he would drag all of humanity up with him. He rose so he could pull everyone up, every man, woman, and child. In this, perhaps he was the greatest of his father's sons, in this aspect. So much like Sanguinius, so much like his friend Horus, so much as well like the old Gorgon, Ferrus Manus. I believe each primarch had their uses, their role. Some built, some fought, some led. Some were examples, or so I believe. Where Dawn was to build the Imperium's walls, Perturabo and Guilliman its roads and highways, Horus its armies, and Alferis its intelligence. Hence I believe that Sanguinius and Fulgrim were cut of the same cloth. I believe they were to be examples. For Fulgrim was the perfect ambassador. Now some say that Lorgar would fill this place. But all of the primarchs had redundancies, so to put it. And I believe that his own primarch ability, as some called him, was a charisma almost as palpable as that of Horus or Sanguinius, but of a slightly different order, a different level, one might say, but no less potent. For many deride and underestimate Fulgrim, looking at what he became. I believe he was secretly one of the greatest of them all, and Horus Lupercal, the War Master, and the Council of Terra agree with me. And here, gentle listener, is why. The Leia Campaign. The Great Crusade was not a mindless, structureless attack in all directions. It surged out, indeed, but there were times when it would circumvent a hard target if its destruction would take too many resources and prevent the expansion. In other words, there were some nuts that they went around and put on a list for the future. The Leia Empire was one such hardpoint. A realm only a single system in scope, one inhabited planet, yet it was seen as a huge problem. Because an exploratory scout fleet had encountered them and been butchered. The entire fleet lost to the last man, and the Leia had lost not one single ship. It was deemed that their technology was such, their forces such, that they would be a major combatant. It was estimated that the extermination of the Leia would require 3 whole legions, millions of auxiliary forces, fleets of ships, and possibly even years to conclude. It was, effectively, out of the reach of the Imperium if they were to maintain their outward rush across the stars. There was even talk of the race being permitted protected status, a non-aggression alliance, a protectorate within the Imperium, with hopes of trading the technology that had made them so formidable. It was indeed a different time. There are few of these regions, these pocket empires, to come back to in the future, but very few. Yet despite this, the sheer impossibility of the task, this would be the first real test of the new 28th Expeditionary Fleet, the personal armada of fulgrim, the transports for his emperor's children to take their righteousness, their skill, unto the stars. The lair were snake-like people, with two pairs of arms at the top of their torso, just below their snake heads. Yet they were lithe and nimble, moved with a preternatural fleetness and an oddness that bent the mind of those who saw them, those who fought them. And their sound-based weapons caused confusion, nausea, and shattered bones, exploded organs, just as advanced as the Marines they fought. Their world was entirely covered in water, but they had created floating land masses, atolls, that glided through the skies above their eternal waves. Their anti-graphitic tech was superior even to the Imperium's. Their warriors almost impossible to break, predict, or take down easily. Much is made of the casualties that were taken. Fulgrim often called a braggart who traded the lives of his men for the petty coin of pride and glory. But I feel again, this is unfair. Perhaps Fulgrim could have moved with more caution, been more careful, spent the lives of his men for greater cost. But it is near impossible to tell. Perhaps Fulgrim knew that the only way to perform this war was to use the tactics of his big brother, Hoarders. To fight horrifically, so that one fights for as short a period as possible. But this was not against humans who would not bend the knee. This was against Xenos' enemies of humanity. And they were putting up the fight of their lives. Yet despite the casualties being high, very high for some legions, the result was the same. And it is no less grand due to its realization. For the campaign that should have taken 3 legions, taken years if not decades, he and his sons had done in months. They had done it alone, and they had done it in record time. The piffling sneering of others at his casualties utterly ignores this most important of factors. For it is always easy to say, I would do it better here or there or in total. Yet none of the other legions of primarchs had chosen this task, and I honestly believe there is not one of them that would have done it better. Not one. Alas, it was this first campaign that immediately led to the downfall of the Primarch. And in his fall, he carried all of his sons with him, and the hope of the crusade was diminished, nearly as badly as if it had been the angel who had turned. Surely the pain of losing Horus was worse, but to lose Fulgrim, that too must have elicited its own dagger in the heart of the Emperor. I honestly believe that. The last battle of the campaign was to be its most bloody, but it was to lead to their doom. On the last atoll of the last region, the capital of Leren itself, there the end came. The largest and best defended atoll was assaulted from all sides by the Emperor's children, their Primarch at their front. The lair fought so hard that they near repulsed the Marines, but eventually the suicidal charges and traps began to slow, then to stop. As the companies surged towards the central area, they wiped out all in front of them. The Primarch at the head of his personal hand-picked elite Phoenix Guard swept forward into the last central amphitheater. At the furthest reaches was a temple. A strange sound, like a horrid twisted music, came from it, the air thick with narcotic smog, pouring from its roof and doors. Fulgrim and his Marines went inside, and they witnessed an alien ceremony. The huge open hallway was filled with this music to eardrum-piercing volumes, the air so thick with stimulants that they could barely see. The last remaining lair seemed ignorant of the newcomers, writhing on the floors in huge carpets, all insensate with pleasure from their copulation and the narcotics in the air. The Marines went forward, shooting into the masses of the things. They offered no resistance whatsoever, as the Emperor's children walked forward and hacked them to pieces instead. While all of this occurred, Fulgrim looked around. He saw the dizzying murals of colors so bright and intense that it hurt the eyes, the sensibilities. Added to the sounds, the very structure created to resound with them and amplify them both internally and externally. It was a bacchanal scheme taken to the extremes beyond normal human conception. All of this occurred under the watch of a huge bull-headed yet bipedal statue, and in the center of this writhing congregation of perverts, in the center of the place of debauched worship, suspended on a perfect plinth, was a simple silver sword, but beautiful and elegant in the sweep of its lines. And the Primarch was drawn to it, not knowing of chaos or demons or curses, believing with every fibre of his being in the imperial truth. Fulgrim simply reached out to take the sword, to look at it at first, but as soon as his hand touched that blade, skin to metal, contact had been made. It had a way in. For he grasped it with purpose, only a nanosecond later, raising it up and knowing that he would take it from this place. It was his now, and soon the merest thought of being parted from it would hurt him. For it was cursed. It was infused with a power and threat that Fulgrim could never understand then, could not have accepted even existed. For his father, the Emperor, had kept all of his sons blind, utterly in the dark, to one of the universal truths of the Milky Way galaxy. He had lied about the existence of gods or demons. He had dissembled, and he had distracted, avoided, and evaded. He had let his sons go about the universe without the basic knowledge of what they were actually up against. For he knew. He always knew. The Emperor could not have made the Primarchs without their assistance, without knowledge he stole from the gods themselves. He just did not tell his sons, not even they. And in this, he was in error. Some say that he has been playing an endless game of four-dimensional chess with each and every one of the gods of chaos. That he is as important a player in the great game as any of the dark gods. That he knew that some of his sons would turn to chaos. That he depended on it. That it was all part of his plan. Yet still, it was the error that left the gates unguarded. For the Primarchs could not defend against that which they were specifically told was not even there. They could not discern the influence of chaos, of demons, of evil, as they were indoctrinated into believing that it could never, ever exist. And it was their father who had told them this. It was the master of mankind who had made them the way they were, trained them in all he deemed they should know, and identifying and protecting them against the corruption of chaos was not something he deemed they should know. An open mind is like a fortress with its gates unbarred and unguarded, as the quote goes in the grim darkness of the far future, and the heresy proves it to be true. For Fulgrim did not know what was happening to him, could not know, and thus the trap of the imperial truth was made manifest, as I've said before, for the Emperor was trapped within his own lie, unless, of course, it was all as he had designed, he and Malkador. But that is for another time entirely. So Fulgrim was in possession of a weapon that contained a demon, and it slowly slunk its tendrils into his mind and soul. But more than this, the entire force that had gone into the temple had come out changed. And worse still, the Primarch permitted the remembrances within his fleet, one of the few to welcome them at all, to go to the surface, to view said temple, to witness its music, to hear its song, to view its images, and it tore their minds to pieces. Alas, it was not immediate, or perhaps others would have been able to see the change, to somehow staunch the infection. But it was not so. The music of the Lair temple haunted their ears, even when waking. The vibrant colours unhinged the minds of those more visual in their medium. All attempted to copy the sounds or colours that they had witnessed, yet they could not do so with the tools at their command. The colours were not bright enough. the sounds from standard musical instruments not deep or expansive enough. And so they went about creating their own tools, and their own methods of emulating what they experienced. And those who went to the palace, be it mortal remembrances or the Astartes who took the place or guarded it later, they all descended into hell. For their minds and hearts could not take the sensory stimulation that they had been exposed to, for it was of chaos. All of it was a vast monument to the Prince of Pleasure, to Slaanesh, and the layer blade that Fulgrim took was dripping with its influence. The demon contained within, it subtly changed Fulgrim, but it radically altered his legion at a rate he did not notice, due to the influence of the blade. It was all-pervading, and soon, so tragically soon, the Emperor's children descended into madness as well. They had been cursed by Slaanesh. It now had them all in its sights. And what a triumph that must have been, to take Fulgrim. Surely only the War Master and the Angel Sanguinius were more sought after by evil. But as I said, it was not obvious, and it was not immediate. The rot crept and crept, slowly by slowly, helped along by the warrior lodge that infected the children from the lunar wolves and horrors. But it was Erebus and the word-bearers secretly behind it all. They who had snuggled it in within the breasts of the lunar wolves before any others. The creep of the rot. Fulgrim had a second chance. He had many. But he took none of them, because he could not see. See what he and his legion were becoming. The first was perhaps the strangest of meetings in the entire period. Fulgrim was changing. His senses were overactive, his sensibilities even more so. His expedition discovered a region of planets that were beautiful beyond belief. The clean air, the seas of lush green grasses, the trees and natural animal life, so beautiful to him. Untouched, perfect. The worlds were perfect. And Fulgrim and those who had been to the temple on Laer would bask in their panoramic vistas, their harmonious balance. One after another should have been catalogued, marked and allotted, the details sent back to the Imperium. They were lush and verdant worlds. Yet Fulgrim and those now closest to him, they wiped the memory banks. They hid the worlds. It was more than passing odd, especially for Fulgrim of all primarchs. But this showed some form of kindred to others who were shadowing his exploration fleet. Sleek ships of ancient design skirted the fleet of the Emperor's children, waiting, watching. Now, seeing his clemency, his appreciation of the beauty the universe was capable of, the Eldar made contact. They arranged to meet with Fulgrim on a world in his path, another perfect planet, a wonder. But this was no coincidence at all, for each of this cluster of worlds had long ago been terraformed by the Eldar. They called them Maiden Worlds, and the Eldar considered them theirs. That they were the homes of the generations of Eldar yet to be born to a new Eldar empire. It was no small thing that the humans were here, but it was no small thing that they had left them untouched either. So the arrangement was made, and a small delegation of men went with their primarch Fulgrim to meet with the Eldar embassage on the maiden world of Tarsus. The Farseer, much younger then, still on the rise, but he was mighty enough to have the guardianship of a legendary race lord called Kieran Goldhelm. It was Eldred Uthran, and he wished to parley with Fulgrim. This was one of the first non-violent meetings with the Eldar, and with a son of the Emperor no less, for the Eldar Farseer, a mystic psyker, leader and prognosticator, ever throwing their vision into the warp to see the patterns as they emerged, the futures that could occur, the best way to manipulate them to their benefit. But they met as dignitaries of their species, Fulgrim and Eldred. Alas, it went badly. For the Eldar thought their view of reality unquestionable, the knowledge they had irrefutable, that it should be taken on face value as the wisdom that it was. Alas, Eldar has never understood humans, Primarch or no. And when he volunteered to fulgrim that his brother, his friend, Horus, stood poised to betray the Emperor, the Crusade and humanity, all to some mad idea of monsters in the warp, the hectic but harmless dimension they travelled through with every ship. It landed like a punch in the gut to fulgrim, who went to take the head of the mage, when the huge Wraithlord belied his size with lightning-quick reactions, blocking the Primarch. Eldred then saw the truth. He recognized the demon blade when so close, for he knew that fulgrim had already been lost. Perhaps he himself was not aware, but the dark whispers of the blade had already begun to take hold. And the rage that fulgrim felt was not just natural, the duty of brother to brother, nor just outrage that the greatest Primarch should be besmirched by a filthy, lying alien, Xeno. It was also enhanced by the rage of the thing that was inside the layer blade, the thing that made fulgrim go into a near-berserk frenzy as he tore the Wraithlord to pieces. The rearguard action of Kieran the Goldhelm performed its purpose, as Eldred retreated to a nearby webway portal intact. But as he neared it, fulgrim in pursuit, the thing flashed, and more Eldar appeared from the slashing reality. But amongst them, towering over the rest, its sinews sizzled as it burned the air around it, the fire pluming from its head, its eyes and teeth as white-hot lava. It was colossal in size, the avatar of Cain, a shard of the elder god of war and murder. And they met in open arms, the avatar and fulgrim. The being threw its spear, its wailing doom, but nothing stopped this enraged son of the Emperor, and the two fought like titans. But it ended with the beast being strangled by the Primarch, his fists clenching into its throat and tearing it out, so its molten blood poured across the ground. It died, and the last of the Eldar with it, on the blades and bolters of the few remaining of fulgrim's bodyguard. They had taken a vicious toll of their own. Yet the Farseer escaped into the webway back to his fleet, and they retreated away from the enraged human expedition. Fulgrim then went on a rampage. He virus-bombed each of the worlds he had before left untouched. He wiped the maiden worlds of all life, destroying countless millennia of development. But why?
Okay, guys. I am tired and about to go to bed. Have a big day tomorrow. I hope you've enjoyed this. I will continue the fulgrim lore tomorrow evening, and I'll see you guys later. Alright, bye.